welcome to the Dr. America Show. I am your host, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, and we are on the We Act Radio Network for yet another episode. Thank you guys very much for coming back with us. So last week, we devoted about half the episode to talk about measles and the importance of getting vaccinated. And over the past week, we've seen how that measles outbreak has sparked a lot of talk, a lot of conversation, and there's been a lot of noise about vaccines. So we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about that today because some stuff that I said on that program and some things that I've written have triggered a lot of interesting, passionate responses, and some of it I feel like I should probably respond to. A lot of it, if you find a nice way to say it, I'll probably respond to it. If you're not all that polite about it, I'm gonna probably ignore it. Just gonna throw that out there. But no, I wrote an article on the Huffington Post that anti-vaxxers are as dangerous as drunk drivers. It was an opinion that I expressed on the show last week, and it's an opinion that I stand by. I feel that if you are making a decision that is putting other people's health and safety at risk, that you are, to be called dangerous. That is pretty much like kind of the textbook definition. And I know that a sentiment like that, an opinion like that, is going to ruffle some feathers, and it was meant to. It was meant to kind of shake us out of some of the complacency where we can't really have a live and let live attitude on this, because let's face it, measles does not live and let live with all of us. This is a serious disease. A lot of the vaccinations that we're giving our kids and ourselves are to stop serious diseases that the diseases don't have an attitude of live and let live. So let's get real about what we need to do to protect each other and to protect our kids and to be healthy Americans. So I've heard a lot about some things that I've said on this show, and then that HuffPo article that I wrote. We're going to put it down in the comments for you guys who haven't had a chance to read it yet. And then there's also just a lot of stuff that's been coming from politicians and other media heads about vaccines and measles. And, none of that stuff has anything to do with me, but it's crazy. Some of it's pretty nuts. And I think it's, we have got to have some pretty good responses to it, even though I'm not crazy about giving airtime to this kind of stupidity. As superheroes, we don't back away from the fights that need to be had. And, one of the missions of this show is to stand up for science. So, let's do this. Villain team-ups are bound to happen. And, Spider-Man has got his Sinister Six. That was like Doc Ock and Electro and Rhino get together to try to beat up on Spider-Man. You got Batman fighting, some of the crazy guys in Arkham Asylum. And you've even got the Justice League taking on the Legion of Doom. And it looks like I've got my vaccine villains. So, to keep things simple, the way that I'm going to kind of break these guys down is I'm just going to take them apart one by one. And so here we go. My first vaccine villain, Governor Chris Christie. All right, Governor, I've tangled with you before on our very first episode about Ebola, and I'm going to come back to that little point and one more time, but let's take a look at what the governor said about vaccines, because he eventually got to a quasi-responsible place, but it was some pretty weak tea when he started talking. So what he said, and I want to make sure I'm getting his words right, was that he was in touring a vaccine manufacturing facility. Okay. And, while he was, taking the tour, he's being asked by, the reporters about the measles outbreak, about vaccines. And, he was saying that parents need to have some measure of choice about vaccinating their children against the measles virus. And, this is really breaking from what us health professionals have been saying about the measles vaccine, is that no, this is a pretty serious virus. It does terrible things to kids. And, parents should choose to get their kids vaccinated. And that's been the position of the health professionals. But Governor Christie apparently thinks that there needs to be some measure of choice. He stopped short of recommending that, parents vaccinate their kids. And, he was trying to, come out with some kind of wiggle room, saying that, he felt that it was important that what you think as a parent is more important than what you think as a public official, referring to, I guess, himself. He said that I also understand that parents need to have some measure of choice in things as well. So that's the balance the government has to decide. And he went on to say that not every vaccine is created equal, and not every disease type is as great a public health threat as others. Well, and then, just to be fair, before I dig into the governor here, let me say that he did clarify his comments. Because, there were obviously and rightfully some people were pretty upset about how the governor handled that question from that reporter. And I guess later on, his staff put out another statement saying that the governor believes vaccines are an important public health protection. And with a disease like measles, there is no question kids should be vaccinated. At the same time, different states require different degrees of vaccination, which is why he was calling for balance in which one's government should mandate. Okay, I think this is like one of those. Now, Governor, I just got to dig into you on this one because this sounds like somebody who is trying to keep up some anti-government, bona fides as he has his eyes on the White House and his GOP, base electorate that he's trying to win over for his primary election. But you know what, Governor? You have to be a governor first, and this presidential wannabe candidate second. Your first job is that you are an elected official, sir. You've got to understand that, measles is a public health threat. And as an elected official, you have to recognize measles does not give a damn about no political party. It is not a Republican virus. It is not a Democrat virus. It is a deadly virus. That's what you need to understand first and foremost when you're talking about recommendations for parents and what, they need to be doing for their kids. Trying to have it every which way, I see what you're trying to do here with trying to appeal to some of these anti-government folks, trying to appeal to some of these parents who have become increasingly anti-government because really what it is, they're anti-Obama. We get that. But as politically astute as you might think you are, it is public health nightmare lunacy to be, trying to instill this idea that parents can choose whether or not to take this disease seriously. That is simply not safe. It's not smart. And I got to call you out on it, Governor. And, this last part about your statement here, let me bring this up one more time. Okay, he's saying that at the same time, different states require different degrees of vaccination, which is why he was calling for a balance in which one's governments, should mandate. And I guess it's because he feels that not every vaccine is equal, not every disease is equal. I just don't get how the governor is assessing his public health threats over here, because let's rewind back to that Ebola, episode, right? He has Nurse Casey Hickox. This woman volunteered to go to West Africa and take care of our brothers and sisters who are dying of Ebola, who are fighting and struggling with a real disease, right? She is about to come back. She is following her organization's protocol about getting tested before she gets on an airplane. She was testing negative and she was asymptomatic when she was over there in West Africa. She's asymptomatic. She has no symptoms, right? And when you have no symptoms, you are not contagious for the virus. And she was testing negative, as it was anyway. She arrives at the airport. The officials learn that she has, been to West Africa taking care of Ebola patients. She makes it clear that she has no symptoms. Chris Christie's government decides that she needs to be escorted to the hospital with about 8 police cars, sirens blaring, going he had no problem throwing the big heavy hand of government on somebody who had been, doing nothing but volunteer work and was posing no public health threat whatsoever. Bringing her to a hospital tent. She wasn't even allowed inside the hospital building. She is stuck in that tent with 0 symptoms and negative blood test results for 3 days. 3 days, and this is Governor Christie saying that he's protecting the public from a health threat that doesn't even exist. Now, along comes measles, which, by the way, has a much deadlier track record of killing Americans than Ebola ever did. Far more contagious virus, far more serious health threat. But luckily, we have a vaccine that stops this thing. That vaccine has a successful track record in America. And what does the governor do? He says that you now can pick and choose whether you really feel that measles is deadly or not deadly. It's up to you. The government really shouldn't be pressuring you about whether you should get vaccinated or not. Really, Governor? How are you assessing these public health threats right now? I mean, seriously, what the big problem that I'm looking at when I see your responses to Ebola and measles is that you seem to be ignoring the science. Science told you that somebody who has got zero symptoms of Ebola is no threat. They are not going to pass on this virus to anybody because they don't have it themselves. Somebody who is asymptomatic with Ebola is not going to pass on Ebola. Science said that. Science also says that, measles is 90% contagious. It can linger in the air long after the patient has exited that airspace. It can exist on a surface for a couple of hours. It is very contagious. We know what the track record of that virus is. And again, you ignore that science and decide that government doesn't have to really get involved whatsoever. So I think, Governor, what's important is, like I was saying before, you need to recognize that you are an elected official first. You have a duty to tell the public the truth about this measles threat and what their best course of action is. Yes, at the end of the day, it is people's choice, but you do have an interest in protecting the health of New Jersey as governor. If you ever want to make it to president, it is probably important for you to understand that protecting people from threats that can be controlled is a really, really basic part of the job. Governor, president, whatever. So yeah, Governor Christie, you made it to my vaccine villains, but yeah, I'm taking you down. All right. My next vaccine villain is yet another elected official who really, really ought to know better, Senator Rand Paul. Okay, for those of you who don't know Senator Paul, okay, I would hope that you do. Senator Rand Paul is an ophthalmologist. His father is a congressman, and that Congressman Paul is a gynecologist. So this man comes from a family of doctors. He was a doctor before he was a senator. So this is supposed to be a man of medical science. Okay, our guy, Senator Rand Paul, gets on CNBC, this past week, and I'm going to read to you what he told this reporter. Okay, he says, I've heard of many tragic cases of walking, talking, normal children who wound up with profound mental disorders after vaccines. I'm not arguing vaccines are a bad idea. I think they're a good thing, but I think the parent should have some input. The state doesn't own your children. Parents own the children, and it is an issue of freedom. Okay. All right. So this is my vaccine villain, Senator Rand Paul. Let's break down everything that is horribly wrong about this statement. First off, you heard of tragic cases of walking, talking, normal children. That's interesting because the world of pediatrics ain't heard about these folks. I always find this line of argument amazingly irritating when I hear Congress people, whether it's Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann talking about how she heard somebody became mentally retarded after getting HPV, or you hear Senator Rand Paul talking about how walking, talking, normal children wound up with profound mental disorders, and they heard about this. You know what, Senator? I heard about a cat that plays piano really well. I heard about a squirrel that can water ski. I heard about that on the internet. You're a man of science. You're a doctor, for God's sake. You have an MD. I've got an MD. You have to realize that you cannot be talking this irresponsibly about what you heard when that has not been proven by medical science. The medical community has a way of assessing these kinds of things that happen with these kids. And honestly, this entire mythology, these urban legends of these, normal, beautiful children suddenly becoming like, disfigured or handicapped by a vaccine is just absurd. None of it has ever happened before. I follow the pediatric literature really closely. There's no way that I would ever let myself get tricked into giving kids something that would harm them. I am not that stupid. I am not that cruel. I don't fall for this kind of stuff. How can you do this, to people, Senator, when you have a medical degree? You are a public elected official. Just like Governor Chris Christie, the same kind of responsibility falls on your shoulders, sir. You do owe it to people to tell them the truth. And then this next part does not clear you. This next part about, I'm not arguing vaccines are a bad idea. I think they're a good thing. No, you don't get to have it both ways. You don't get to go and pump the urban legend and then try to give this weak tea apology about vaccines. No, it doesn't work quite like that. And then this thing about, I think the parents should have some input. Yes, it's called informed consent. Every physician in the country, makes sure that they are getting consent from the parent multiple times during the entire course of their children's health care. Parents have input every single step of the way. Every time a child comes in for a well child checkup to get their health checked as a baby, I'm telling the parents exactly what we're vaccinating against, what those diseases do, and what the possible side effects of the vaccine could be. I run through all of that. I ask the parents, do you have any questions about any of that? Let's talk about it. And you know what? We have the conversation. And yes, that is parent involvement. Almost every pediatrician I know who has to give vaccines does exactly what I am talking about. These conversations happen, and you make it sound like the parents have had no input this entire time. They have input. Almost every pediatric practice that I know of is full of doctors and nurses who are informing the parents every step of the way, redundantly so, about their right to choose, about their right to be informed, about all of the information that is available to us. We give it to them in print. We talk about it. We say everything that we can to keep the entire vaccination experience as transparent as possible. So yes, parents do have vaccine input. This next thing about, this is the part that really, I just don't even get it. The state doesn't own your children. Parents own the children, and it is an issue of freedom. I love how, the conservative, politician mindset, they just seem that you can, say the word freedom or liberty, and all of a sudden that just puts them on this, moral high ground. Let's get real about this thing here. We're talking about measles. We're talking about whooping cough. We're talking about rubella. We're talking about diseases that have a lethal track record for children. Okay, there is no freedom from, from these things. Measles is 90% contagious. What freedom do you think you've got from that when it can linger in the air for 2 hours after the infected patient has left that airspace? There's no freedom from that. That is to bring up the word in a scientific conversation just to put yourself on this political high ground to score some convenient points. It's just nuts. It's just nuts. And this whole thing about the state doesn't own your children. No, but you seem to make it very clear about that the state does seem to have ownership over the citizenship. If kids from other countries want to try to come to the border and seek asylum here, all of a sudden the state has our kids back, but not those kids' back. The state ownership of kids seems to be very loose in your mind, Senator. I've never really understand about this whole thing about how state owns people. But so let me just put that aside and talk about how, as a child health provider, how I see society's ownership of children. Okay. The thing is that, yes, I get it that a parent has sons, daughters, and they consider them their children. Yes, this is the way we identify family and all of that. But we do have this thing we do in society talk about our children. We talk about society's children in a much more global sense, because there comes a point where we have to look at our children as our fellow Americans. These are the most vulnerable among us, that we want to protect them, that when we send our kids to school, that we should be able to do so knowing that, they have some safety, some security there, that their classmates are not going to be infecting them with diseases that are totally totally preventable. That is something that, yeah, I don't own my, the other kids as classmates. Those are not necessarily my children, but they are our kids in that global sense that we are all tied together in this thing. That the measles doesn't really stop and check whose child you belong to and whether you're a state-owned child or a parent-owned child or what. We're talking about diseases that really don't give a damn about your politics, and that we have every power to stop, and that we ought to be stopping. This whole thing about the state does not own your children, of course they don't own your children. But I will say that the country does have some interest in having safe, healthy kids not pass deadly diseases to each other and wreck childhoods and wreck potential that is there for our fellow Americans. The country does have an interest in that. It's not about ownership. It's about our country's values that, we look at our young kids as our fellow Americans with potential that we want to see bloom and grow and develop as they progress through childhood. This isn't about a state ownership thing, and it's not really this freedom thing as you seem to bastardize the word. This is about health. This is about safety. Get it together, Senator. You're a doctor. You should know better. All right, the next vaccine villain. Oh, you're going to love this piece of work. This is another doctor who should be knowing better. This is Dr. Jack Wolfson. Okay, for those of you who don't know, I'm going to rewind back a little bit on Dr. Jack Wolfson's story just to kind of put his narrative in a little bit more context. So this is a cardiologist. He considers himself a paleocardiologist. His words, not mine. You tell me what that means. Anyway, so he's on KPNX in Phoenix, Arizona, okay? The other guest that is on the air with Dr. Wolfson is a Dr. Sachs. Dr. Sachs is a pediatrician, so he knows what he's talking about when it comes to measles vaccines, as it is, just because of the line of work that he's in. He also knows how vulnerable, in a very personal sense, the situation is with the measles outbreak, because he has a young daughter who has leukemia. This child has been through chemotherapy that has wiped out her immune system. So even though she might be technically speaking old enough to have the vaccine and did get vaccinated, the chemotherapy that she has been on has pretty much wiped out her immune system. It's what typical chemotherapy does. So Dr. Sachs is basically trying to remind parents that it's important to get vaccinated. And he's, speaking both as a pediatrician and the parent of a very vulnerable child. And he's just basically trying to tell what every other professional health organization, what every other public health society has been trying to tell, everyday Americans: get yourself vaccinated against the measles, that we can stop this thing. The children in our life deserve this. Okay. Enter Dr. Jack Wolfson. You're going to love this piece of work. And and honestly, the interview is actually worth watching because, I'm probably vilifying this man, and I can tell you right now, he vilifies himself in a degree that is just, this is some Green Goblin stuff here. It really just, blows my mind how comfortable this man is with his position. So he's anti-vaccine, okay? And he, when CNN and the people on the news are, confronting him about his views about being, anti-vaccine, he says, and he brings up Dr. Tim Sachs's daughter when he says this, he says, "As far as I'm concerned, it's very likely that her leukemia is from vaccinations in the first place." There's something so low about this. First off, there's no scientific proof of that. And quite frankly, to go and attack a vulnerable child like that with some pseudoscience, nonsense is just ridiculous. And you're a cardiologist, you're a doctor, for God's sake, saying this, Dr. Wolfson. Shame on you for that point. But you make things worse. You make it worse by saying that when the CNN interviewer asks him repeatedly if he could live with himself if his unvaccinated children, got other children like Dr. Sachs's daughter. The CNN reporter is actually telling Dr. Wolfson, can you live with yourself if your boys who are not vaccinated get Dr. Sachs's daughter, who is a leukemic child, if you get her fatally sick, I mean, the CNN reporter doesn't just like say if you get her sick. He's actually describing like a very morbid, like, set a very real possibility that, okay, you know what? Your unvaccinated boys could get this other doctor's very, very legitimately sick, child, this girl, sick and fatally so. The CNN reporter is asking, could you live with yourself if this were to happen? And this is what Dr. Wolfson says. He says, and I quote, "I could live with myself easily. It's an unfortunate thing that people die, but people die. And I'm not going to put my child at risk to save another child." Okay. And that's the end of the quote. Dr. Wolfson, you know what? I think it's time for you to just hang up your medical license, man. I mean, you know what? You have no business, being in the field. I think that you forgot the oath that all of us took on, med school graduation day, the Hippocratic Oath. It starts off with the words, "do no harm." It's not optional. You don't get to it's not like a set of boxes and you get to click whether you want to do the do no harm part or not. Like, that's not the way the oath works. You took the oath saying that you would do no harm. You're being asked if you are your brother's keeper, and as if you are Cain from Cain and Abel, you're basically saying like, nah, that's not on me. I don't care if somebody else's child dies because of like my child bringing a preventable disease into this like vulnerable child's life. It's just shocking to me. I just don't get how you can call yourself a cardiologist. Paleocardiologist, whatever that is. Honestly, you are doing a huge disservice here. And in the best interest of your patients, in the best interest of the field of medicine, hang up the white coat, go put your medical license aside, do not renew that license. Honestly, stop calling yourself a doctor. You're not worthy of the title. You've done the oath a huge disservice. And honestly, I think you owe Dr. Tim Sachs a major apology. And I really, and I know, having watched the interview with Dr. Sachs's family and his wife and everything, they seem like lovely people. And I doubt that they're going to ever ask you for an apology, Dr. Wolfson. But you owe this family and that little girl a major apology. That was just so uncalled for. To talk about how you want to keep your children pure. That was his quote. He wants to keep his children pure, and that he doesn't care if something unfortunate happens to a leukemic child because he didn't take enough preventable steps with his own family. Shame on you, sir. That is just completely against the spirit of our field, and you really need to just hang it up. You are not worthy of being a doctor anymore. That's just the way that is. I don't care how harsh that sounded. All right. So the next couple of vaccine villains that I got, they're not really specific people. They're kind of amalgamations of folks that I seem to be running into on the interwebs and the Twitter sphere and all of that. And I kind of came up with three personality types, or three kind of three personas that I seem to be running into a lot because of the things that I've said or the things that some of my other medical colleagues have said. So it's time to take you vaccine villains down too. First up, I've got dumpster diving pseudoscience guy. Just to give you guys a description of this vaccine villain, this is the type of person where they're going to keep digging up that garbage that, Dr. Andrew Wakefield put up on Lancet, the journal that actually retracted his article about how vaccines cause autism. They're the people who go and they put up passages from Jenny McCarthy's books, and it's those people. It's the people who think that they find some obscure kind of thing that looks really scientific, but it isn't, and it got rejected by the scientific community, rightly so. And they keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it as if this is the truth, that this is the gospel, that you have got to believe this stuff, no matter how many times the scientific community has come out and said, no, it's simply not true. There is no link between autism, and vaccines. There simply isn't. And in fact, the science that has been pushed as science isn't really. Like when you look at how shabby the workmanship was of Dr. Wakefield, when you look at the new thing that's come up this fall of 2014 was this CDC whistleblower. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but it's some guy who used to work at the CDC who, put out some kind of paper or something that when you actually look at how this person structured this paper to kind of describe how vaccines and autism are somehow linked, I mean, the science behind it is so shabby. It's like if this guy were my classmate in the statistics class that I had to take at public health school, they would have flunked his sorry ass so fast because this is just some of the most garbage science that I have ever seen be put out there. It's not science. And to call it so is an insult to some of my friends who are working extremely hard in, really important scientific work, and to equate this nonsense with that, high quality labor, it's an insult. It's just simply an insult. And the problem with the dumpster diving science guy is that he does not stop. What you will find is that this is the person where, no matter how many times it gets rejected, they're going to be one of those people where, they're never satisfied. There's never enough kids who can get studied. The CDC actually studied 500,000 kids who got the MMR vaccine. This is 500,000 children who got the MMR vaccine, and they compared them to 100,000 children who did not get the MMR vaccine. So you got 500,000 who got the MMR vaccine, 100,000 who did not. They went through this data. They had other researchers go through this data. They did that independent thing where your peers review the work that you do, see if they come up with the same result, and they keep coming up with the same result, that there's no link between autism and vaccines. There simply isn't. They literally took 500,000 kids and they took another 100,000 and they said, no, these two groups, there's no link between their experiences with vaccines and their experiences with autism. Ain't got nothing to do one with the other. This does not seem to sway dumpster diving pseudoscience guy. It's almost like this is his superpower, he can hear something that compelling and just reject it. This is the supervillain strength that we've got to go up against, because then dumpster diving pseudoscience guy will go and turn around and then blame the media for not believing him. He'll go on to say that it's some kind of big conspiracy and that, he says that the mainstream media is ignoring all the garbage. And this is not to say that the mainstream media is right all the time. There are plenty of things that they screw up. The big media giants never seem to have a good conversation about race or guns or poverty or climate change. But when it comes to vaccines, they have been given more science than was probably necessary to disprove any connection between vaccines and autism. There is simply nothing there. There is no there. So honestly, I don't think that we've seen the last of dumpster diving pseudoscience guy, because let's face it, the internet is not going anywhere. But honestly, you're really, really just wasting the airspace by constantly bringing up disproven garbage science that really just needs to be thrown out. All right, next vaccine villain, also not a specific person, but it's those people, and you've probably met these folks. These are the people who cling very tightly to that anti-corporate, anti-government, kind of ideology. It's there's nothing that government can say that they're going to trust. There's nothing that a corporation can say that they're going to trust. And the thing is that there's actually something about these folks that feels a little bit compelling, because if anybody has ever kind of looked at government track records and corporate track records and just seen the errors and mistakes, it's you can see oh, there's the BP oil spill, and then there's this product recall and that product recall, and government messing up on Hurricane Katrina, and all these, there's a bad track record. And I'll be the first one to say that government and corporations have an ugly track record of messing up. They have messed up. But that is not the only thing on the track record. Let's be fair about looking at the entire track record. It's not right to just look at like a series of screw ups and then have this blanket statement that anything coming out of government or anything coming out of corporations is wrong and false and cannot be trusted. That's actually I think it's bizarre to me that these anti-establishment type people are blindly following that ideology, and part of their criticism of the rest of us is that we're apparently sheep for blindly following government and corporations. I don't believe in blindly following anybody. I mean, and the best way I think to kind of prove my point about vaccines to the anti-corporate, anti-government crowd is basically let's look at another safety product that's out there, right? Let's look at seatbelts. Okay. Seatbelts get studied by Toyota, Ford, any number of the big, car companies. And they do have a profit motive for safety. It is in their profit interest to research seatbelts, research airbags, research all this stuff. And yeah, they are doing it because they want to make profit off of being able to create the safest vehicle possible. And they want to be able to market safety, So they're going to do all these crash tests. They're going to show off all these crash tests. There's a ton of research that these corporate folks are doing about the safety mechanisms that are in the cars. Now, you've got the Department of Transportation. They are also doing research about these kinds of things. Their motivations are not necessarily profit. They do not really make any money off of, better airbags or better seatbelts or things like that. What they need to know is that, are these things actually living up to the standards that Toyota and Ford and all these people are talking about? Are they being, are they getting the wool pulled over their eyes, or do these things actually work? You have the Highway Patrol. They are also looking at seatbelts, airbags, car seats, all these things. And they also kind of want to know, what can we do to stop motorists from dying in car accidents? So they're interested in this data too. Does it make a difference if, the people in the front seat are wearing seatbelts, or if the people in the back seat are also wearing seatbelts? They want to know all of that kind of stuff. All this data is getting processed. All this data is out there, right? And they come up with, pretty much the same kinds of things. Toyota, Ford, Honda, all these guys are going to tell you the same thing about, drive responsibly. And yeah, our car can help you do that. Safety is important to us. It's important to you. Our product is safe. You're going to look at the Department of Transportation telling you that, yeah, here are the, recommendations for how to keep a car seat in your car. We highly recommend this. It's good for your baby. And then you've got the Highway Patrol basically kind of telling you the same thing. Either you click it or you're going to get a ticket. They're going to say you've got to get you've got to wear a seatbelt. Your baby has to be in a car seat. Now, these are governments and corporations telling you all these things about seatbelts and car seats. And are you really going to stop wearing a seatbelt? Are you really going to stop putting your baby in a car seat because the message came from a corporation or the message came from the government? Really? Are you going to reject, seatbelts and car seats because you didn't like that it came from, the Highway Patrol, or that it came from Toyota, that this is a good idea, and that, yeah, maybe Toyota or whoever, Ford, GM, you name it, that maybe, yeah, they are making some profit off of a car with safer seatbelts. Maybe they're making a profit off of it. This is not necessarily to say that when the pharmaceutical industry wants to make better, safer vaccines, I'm not necessarily saying that there's zero conflict of interest. Yeah, there might be some conflicts of interest here or there, but they're not really the ones that you guys are thinking of. One of the questions that I got asked on the internet is whether I have any conflicts of interest when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry. I can tell you that I absolutely have zero. In all truth and honesty, I do not get paid for giving kids vaccines. I do not get paid for talking about vaccines in the way that I've been talking about them. Merck doesn't give a damn about what I'm saying. They are not, they are not outside the studio with the check. They are not, they have no control over what I'm talking about. There is no conflict of interest here. And I can tell you that the way that a lot of these vaccines are financed from a public health financing perspective, The vaccine company, the pharmaceutical industry, they already got their check for, making like, thousands of vials of vaccine. Like they show up to like a public health department, they show up to, Vaccines for Children, this program that gives like, vaccines for free so that the cost is not going to be an issue for parents who can't afford it. I mean, they show up with, these like, huge, you can imagine like, right, like these pallets of, vaccines, boxes and boxes of single dose vials. The contract is that, your state's or your city's public health department or Medicaid or whoever are going to contract for, we need this many thousand vials or this many million vials or whatever. And, the contract is made, the company gets paid. The thing is, the company got paid for the vials even before it even gets like to your clinic, or even before the nurse fills the syringe up and, is giving it to your child. The company already made the money before you decided whether or not to vaccinate. So if you choose not to vaccinate because somehow you think you're going to be sticking it to the corporate guy, you're actually kind of not. The truth is that like the way that the stuff is financed is that you're simply not really making all that much of a difference. And that if you really wanted to like stop these guys from making money, is that you really would have to have the guts to say that you really don't think anybody's children, including your own, should be getting vaccinated, and that you really don't want Medicaid to like make the contract with the vaccine company anymore. And are you really about to do that? Are you really about to go and put other people's children at risk again by saying that like, yeah, you know what, you shouldn't be making this contract for the public's health? And guys, I'm not, this is by no means defending corporate America. This is not defending the government. I will gladly admit to plenty of the screw ups that have happened. But on this one, the anti-corporate, anti-government guy, you're just not right about this one. There isn't really a huge profit motive for pediatricians to give vaccines. There simply isn't. It's just not the way that we finance these things. It's not the way that, pediatricians and, the vaccine manufacturers work. It's just not there. You're really trying to dig up and create a conspiracy that just simply doesn't function in today's modern public health world. All right. My last vaccine villain, and this is somebody who, I don't know where and this actually really, a lot of this that we've been talking about so far just points to the problem of science literacy and the lack of it. But this last person, I just don't get where they come from. These are who I like to call the nature is magic people. These are the people where, they're going to try and tell you that that your immune system is somehow like this muscle and that it gets a workout whenever it fights off deadly diseases like measles, and that it would be better for our immune system if we got the workout of fighting off measles and, even at the risk of brain damage and deafness and blindness, that somehow the immune system is strong enough to do this fight by itself. No, that's just not how our immune systems work. That is not quite, not quite the science involved. And, I can go and sit through the entire immunology chapter of the book with you and everything, but at the end of the day, this is just not how our bodies function. And I would rather point to the track record that proves this is not how our body functions, okay? Let's take a look at the measles virus versus, let's say, the common cold. Okay, the common cold is something that your immune system is capable of fighting off on its own. It doesn't necessarily make it stronger, per se. It does make it a little bit more experienced so that, the same cold virus comes around for a second time, you now have an immunity. That's kind of the way that, our defense systems internally kind of work. Measles, on the other hand, measles and human beings have been fighting each other for generations, okay? Long before the vaccine comes along, you look at how old measles is, and it's as old as civilization. Measles has done a great job of whooping civilization's ass every now and then. It was doing major damage to people time and time and time again. Yes, People survived, but, they also had to look around after the outbreak was done and see like, oh, wow, this guy's got, brain damage. This person is deaf. This person is blind. That measles really whooped us. Yes, it did. And then, the next generation comes along and it's kind of the same experience all over again. There's no magic to our immune system on this one, folks. I mean, this is not the common cold. This is a virus with, serious consequences. And yeah, it's worth it for our immune system to get some help, to get some, to get like a little bit of a boost from the vaccine. The way that this vaccine works is that it shows pieces of a dead virus to our immune system so that our immune system can now construct a defense so that when the real thing comes along, you've already got the defense ready to go. And your immune system can now fight this off. Without the vaccine, your immune system is basically going to try and fight this thing off ad hoc. It's going to kind of come up with the best that it can, and it might do a good job, but it might not. And because it might not, that's where you start to wonder, okay, is this person going to be the one that gets, brain damage, deafness, blindness? Is that going to be this guy? Is it going to be this other person? Or are they just going to get a pneumonia? These are not the risks that we are worth taking. And this is why, there's no magic to our immune systems. We know that this vaccine works. We know the science behind why it works. And we have a track record that after the measles vaccine came along and people started getting vaccinated in huge numbers, yeah, measles wasn't so much of an ass whooper after that. It just wasn't. I mean, it showed up and it just didn't get a chance to, make a foothold in our society because enough of us bought into it, created a community immunity, and that right there is not magical either. That's a product of public health. And this is how we succeeded against one of the most deadliest viruses that human beings have been fighting ever since human beings decided that civilization was a good idea. There is no magic here, folks. I'm sorry. The nature is magic, people. No, your immune system does not go stronger just because you decided to pick up a fight with measles and polio and all the rest of it. No, your immune system does not need a workout. All right. So that brings us to the end of our vaccine villains. I hope you guys had as much fun beating them up as I did, because I don't think we've seen the last of them, and there'll probably be another good fight. Goodness knows that, Spider-Man, Batman, all these guys have a great time beating up on, Dr. Octopus and the Joker and Two-Face and all these villains. So we'll have our fun again with these guys. I'm sure that, we haven't seen the last of Governor Chris Christie and we haven't seen the last of Senator Rand Paul. Hopefully we've seen the last of Dr. Jack Wolfson. And we definitely haven't seen the last of dumpster diving pseudoscience guy. They're going to be back, and so will we. You've been listening to Dr. America. I am your host, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, on the We Act Radio Network. We'll be right back. Thanks a lot.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
All right, welcome back to the Dr. America Show. I am your host, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, here on the We Act Radio Network. And, for the last segment of the show, we were talking about our vaccine villains, and I think, we got to give them some 1-2 punches. And that's a little bit of a carryover from last week's episode where we were talking about the measles outbreak and the importance of vaccinations. Another carryover that we got from last week is concussions, because this past weekend at the Super Bowl, we all, if you were watching the game, and this is one of the most watched things in American history on TV, so there's a pretty good chance that all of us saw this. We all saw, we all saw a concussion live, And we actually watched Julian Edelman of the New England Patriots play through a concussion. And it's one of those things that, I mean, like, even even the sports announcer was kind of like noticing it himself. He was saying, like, you run a route across the middle against his defense, you do so at your own risk. And that's Chris Collinsworth's own words right there. And this is what he said that after Edelman suffered this brutal hit where he I mean, you saw this, like, I mean, what I thought was supposed to be against the rules, like, helmet to helmet kind of hit from the Seahawks Cam Chancellor. And when and what he did though was that he gets hit, and then Edelman pops right back up, and then he runs again, and he like keeps playing. He's like playing through this concussion. And the reason why this is concerning to me is that this is actually against the NFL protocol on concussions. For all of the controversy that the NFL has had to endure for concussions and traumatic brain injury and everything, they're actually breaking their own protocol. And as somebody who, like, just like last week, we were talking to Dr. Moin Sala about, as somebody who cares about kids and, we've got like young athletes in our lives, we're actually watching them do what we are trying our best to tell kids not to do, which is like, we're watching this guy, we're watching Edelman from the Patriots play through this concussion. And I mean, like, the protocol is actually that he's not supposed to be doing. It says that if a player exhibits or reports signs or symptoms of concussion on the field, he must be removed and evaluated by the team's medical team, like their medical people. And the observable signs listed by the NFL protocol includes slow to get up following a hit to the head, motor coordination or balance problems where, like, they're stumbling, they trip or fall, like they have, like, slow kind of movement, or they have a blank vacant look. Now, I mean, camera didn't get all up close into Edelman's face to actually see whether he had a blank or vacant look, but for all of us who were watching the game, it was pretty clear that this guy was, like, slow to get up after he had just been hit in the head pretty darn hard, and that he was stumbling around a little bit. And, so to help me actually kind of like talk about some of this, I'm calling in my producer, Pete Callahan, who, has some experience as a young athlete himself. Pete, the thing that kind of like strikes me about this whole situation is that, this is a guy where, I don't know whether Edelman himself has ever like given an interview where he talks about not wanting to be a role model and all of that. But, we see that a lot. We see a lot of athletes say, like, I don't want to be a role model. I don't want to be a role model. But I feel like you got to at least be a role model in the thing that you are doing on the field. I mean, you have to model, like, some of these, safer, healthier behaviors when it comes to concussions. And this guy just played right through.
So I have a couple different takes on this. The first is that I played hockey and football and lacrosse in high school. And so it's all very high contact sports. And so this kind of thing happened to me probably 3 or 4 times at least, and like more minor stuff. And I've seen this happen to other people. People always played on. But now that we know a lot more than we did then, for them not to follow this, I know the Super Bowl is kind of abhorrent. On the other hand, like, these players aren't going to self-report in the Super Bowl. And when, the average lifespan of NFL players is only 3 years. So I think you got to weigh that. In some ways, it is the financial thing, but I also think that, I think they still haven't gotten it. It's obvious in the NFL that they have a policy that can really take care of this stuff.
Yeah. Now, how long ago are you talking about your young athlete sports career?
So I haven't played sports in 10 years.
Okay. So like, so 10 years ago, like, I mean, I'll give benefit of the doubt that we didn't know, then what we know now. Right. But before we actually even started recording, you were telling me the story of a hockey teammate who endured a pretty bad concussion. Do you mind just sharing that story, because I just thought it was so illustrative of the problem that we have with this attitude of like just playing right through a concussion.
Yeah, so he got completely knocked out, and they didn't stop playing a hockey game. There's about 30 seconds left in the period. And so he got back up eventually, didn't have the wherewithal, but was a very good player, ended up stealing the puck because the person that was passing with the puck thought that he was like down for the count and was just keep skating on, and then scored a goal. But then when the period ended 20 seconds later, he came in the locker room and threw his helmet and thought we'd already lost the game when there was still a period left and was completely out of it. So you can actually, in my experience, I've seen this, that you can keep going and keep playing, but you need to have someone, either an official or someone from the team, to tell a player they have to sit down and they can't play anymore.
Right. I mean, and that, and that's where I would like to think that, like, 10 years of, like, learning more, doing better, like, I mean, I would like to think that we practice better, like, that's the thing, like, where, like, we got to start practicing what we preach. And I mean, I get your point about, like, it's a Super Bowl and there's, like, a lot of money on the line, and these are, I mean, professional athletes with, like, a lot at stake for their career. But if we're gonna be, like, watching some things at the Super Bowl, like, these, like, really, like, that nationwide commercial about, like, being reminded that, like, unintentional accidents are, like, a leading cause of child death. If we're gonna get messaging like that, I'd like to think that we can get some messaging from the behavior of the athletes that, that they're not gonna just play through a concussion. You know what I mean?
And I think when something like that happens, like, there needs to be someone that stops play and administers a test to the person. And we have the test now to know if someone, even if they don't admit it, are concussed or not.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, it looks like the NFL protocol has a lot of work to do, and it looks like we've still got a long way to go as far as protecting our athletes, both professional, amateur, from very preventable brain damage, by actually following some of and practicing what we preach. I think that I appreciate these points that having professionals and trainers and health practitioners on the field can help, but if we're just going to give lip service to some of this stuff, I think we're looking at some of our pastimes becoming more and more dangerous, despite us having more and more knowledge. It doesn't have to be like that, folks. So we're coming up at the end of the hour, and I want to thank you guys again for tuning in to another episode of Dr. America. Looks like we've spent another episode talking about measles and concussions. I assure you that that's not all that's going to be happening this February. There's a lot to talk about for our nation's health, but as long as folks keep wanting to post, and counter my opinions about vaccines, and if folks want to, weigh in on how we can help our athletes with concussions, I'm happy to respond. Thank you guys so much for keeping the conversation going online. That you've been listening to the Dr. America Show. I am your host, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, on the We Act Radio Network. And until next time, salud to your health.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
My name is Joe Thompson. I'm 29 years old and I have a career that I love as a systems analyst. Career. It still sounds cool to say that word. I never could have gotten on this path without a college degree. And if the college me were here, he'd tell you.
I never would have gotten to college without Big Brothers Big Sisters. I could have ended up anywhere, on the streets even. But college? Joe Thompson? Not likely. My big brother helped me out. He taught me I could do anything, at a time when a lot of people were saying just the opposite.
And to a 7-year-old, that means a lot. My big brother's name is Phil. And Phil is the reason that this 7-year-old grows up to be a systems analyst.
Whether you donate money or time, you're helping Big Brothers Big Sisters help a child. And that can last a lifetime. Start something today at bigbrothersbigsisters.org. Brought to you by Big Brothers Big Sisters and the Ad Council.
I'm a third grade teacher.
I'm a school bus driver.
I am a parent.
I am a teacher's aide, and I agree to be identified
as a caring adult who pledges to help bullied students.
I will listen carefully to all students who seek my help
and act on their behalf
to put an immediate stop to bullying.
I will work with other caring adults to create a safe
learning environment for all the students in my school.
In my school.
In my school.
In my school.
I'm Dennis Van Rokel, President of the National Education Association. Help us create safe, bully-free learning environments for all students. One caring adult can make all the difference. Be that adult and take the pledge at NEA.org/bullyfree. Adults have the power to stop bullying in our schools.
It starts with me.
It starts with me.
It starts with me.
It starts with me.
Bully-free. It starts with me.
Visit NEA.org/bullyfree. A message from the National Education Association.
Let me tell you who to blame. Blame the boy lying at your feet, his body oozing life through the hole in his stomach where the bullet tore him apart. Blame him for challenging you, for not looking away and for not backing down when you pulled out the gun. Blame your mother for bringing you into this world when she was but a kid herself and for dragging you up, not bringing you up. Blame society for not giving you hope. Blame your father for not being there, the man who looked after himself instead of looking after you. Blame the gun in your hand for making you a target, for making you more likely to be picked on. Blame the dead boy, blame your mother, blame society, blame your father, blame the gun, blame anyone but yourself for not being strong enough to put down the gun, to break the cycle.